when I was in charge of postgraduate education for extra European activities, we ran a number of courses in India, and always the question came, what can you teach us from Western medicine? I said, well, in my area of diabetic nerve and foot disease, you taught us, because it was the pioneering work done here, very near here in Tamil Nadu, in Vellore, in Karigiri, in leprosy, that taught us how to look after the insensitive foot. Because whether it's caused by diabetes or by leprosy, the end result can be the same, the foot ulcer and loss of limb. So let me update you now on type 2 diabetes, the 21st century epidemic. As you heard in the excellent oration of your Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi ji, yesterday, for the first time in our history, in recent years, it's non-communicable diseases that have become the leading cause of global mortality. And diabetes, as I will show you in an updated slide soon, contributes sadly much to mortality as well as morbidity. A few years ago, this is what we thought the situation was. We thought, of course, that the number of people with diabetes across the world was extremely high, and that the biggest increases in the next 2 decades would be in Asia, in South America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Sadly, this is still true. This is a physical atlas of the world, and here we are in Karnataka down here, and here's Manchester somewhere over here in this small island, and University of Miami, where I also work, is down here. So this is the physical atlas of the world. If we change the shape of this according to the distribution of population in the world, we see this. And of course, Asia is a very highly populated area, and of course, India, with more than 1.2 billion people, is too. Similarly, if we look at the distribution of diabetes across the world, we see that the shape is like this. Or at least this is how we thought it was some 5 or 6 years ago. It was thought that India had the dubious distinction of having the most people with diabetes in any one country, and also number 2 was China, and number 3 was the United States. And this is what we thought the situation was, with approximately 51 million in 2010 people with diabetes here, and slightly less in China, and the predicted increases are here. But this has changed following this paper that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2010 from China. And this paper looked at the prevalence of diabetes in a good population-based study. And if you look here, this is the increase in the prevalence of diabetes from 2.5% 20 years ago, now to just under 10%. Now, if the population of China is 1.3 billion, this means that there are probably more than 130 million people with diabetes in China. Sadly, we don't know the true prevalence of diabetes in most countries. And this is something, working together with Dr. Nagendra and his excellent team here, we're going to try and correct by doing a proper population-based study in Mysore, which has a relatively stable population. In your standards, it's a small town of 1 million or so people, and a relatively stable population with not much migration as you would see in bigger cities. So to do a proper population-based study of different wards according to social status, income, and rural or peri-urban or urban will help us detect the true prevalence of diabetes, which I fear will be much higher than we thought. Indeed, 2 months ago, I was here and met the former Minister of Health of Karnataka, who accompanied us around Mysore. And we went to a rural village. And in this village, they weren't used to seeing a lot of Caucasian people arriving suddenly, and everybody amassed in the village hall, and we just asked, how many people are known to have diabetes? And about 13% in a rural population. Now, we know that diabetes is more common in urban populations, so it's frightening. The results of this will be frightening and will show us that there are many more people here with diabetes than is known. Another worrying thing that is very common, and that is in this study from China, only just under 30% of people actually knew they had diabetes. Now, the world capital of diabetes in terms of prevalence is in the Middle East. And this was a paper I picked up on the way to lecture in Dubai. And in the main domestic page, just in 2011, 5 years ago, cases of diabetes progressing and increasing much more than projected. But it's not only the Middle East, where up to 1 in 3 in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait has diabetes. It's everywhere. This is a journal I picked up. I've just finished 4 years as president of European Diabetes Association, and our headquarters are in Düsseldorf in Deutschland, or Germany. And I picked up this on the way to a meeting in Düsseldorf from Manchester, and this was the title on a magazine from a Western country, Die Süße Falle, diabetes. Translated, that means the sweet trap. And there was a long article about how diabetes is increasing in Germany. But it's not only type 2 diabetes, it's type 1 or insulin dependent as well. And these are data from Finland that has the highest incidence of type 1 diabetes in the world, showing that the projected increase is actually an underestimate. It's increasing faster. And in this paper, just published last week online in Diabetes Care, looking at pediatric diabetes in the United States, this shows that there's been a 52% increase in the annual prevalence of diabetes in young people. And the highest is seen in the 12 to 18 age group. So type 1 and type 2 diabetes are becoming more common. So we have a war against diabetes. And over the course of any war, there will be many battles that need to be fought and need to be won, local, national, global. Let me update you. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Vancouver at the International Diabetes Federation meeting in Canada. And this is the updated IDF Atlas, and my good friend David Cavan, who's a physician working at the IDF, has lent me these slides. And you see here the current numbers and the projected increase. And it's reckoned now that there are over 400 million people with diabetes, although the figure is probably nearer 450 million in truth. And you see here in Southeast Asia, which includes India, the projected number in 2040 is going to be 140 million, a nearly 50% increase in the next 25 years. So this gives us a feel of what is believed to be the case. Sadly, this is probably an underestimate. As I pointed out from the study in China, 1 in 2 people in the world with diabetes doesn't know they have it. It's undiagnosed. And here's the updated figures of the contribution of diabetes and non-communicable disease to global mortality. And it is reckoned that 5 million people died last year as a consequence of diabetes, or more likely the complications of diabetes. This compares with only 15 lakh, if you look here, of people with HIV/AIDS, 15 lakh, again, people with tuberculosis, and only 6 lakh, or 600,000, contributed by malaria. So if you add all these communicable diseases together, it's much less than the contribution of diabetes. People say, well, diabetes is a mild disease, it's a touch of sugar. Don't go away, please, with that impression. There's nothing mild about diabetes. We have to take it seriously. We have to realize that the complications of diabetes, in some cases, the outlook is worse than for most cancers, as I will show you. Here we have the proportion of people who died from diabetes who were under the age of 60. And you see in India, it's between 40 and 60%, as judged by the color you see in the map just here. Here are some more statistics from the IDF, 2015. 1 in 11 adults across the world has diabetes. 1 in 2, as I've already told you, is probably undiagnosed. 12% of global health expenditure goes on diabetes. 1 in 7 births are affected by gestational diabetes, and 1 in 14 has impaired glucose tolerance, or if you like, pre-diabetes. Diabetes is not a mild disease. We need to be focusing on prevention. Primary prevention is identifying high-risk individuals and trying to see if we can prevent progression from impaired glucose tolerance to diabetes. This is an area that yoga has already, as you've heard from the excellent talk by Dr. Nagendra, has contributed to. And yoga may contribute in early diabetes, but also in preventing progression from those with pre-diabetes to getting type 2 diabetes. The diabetes prevention program in the United States showed that the best way to prevent diabetes was lifestyle change. This took a high-risk group of people with pre-diabetes and randomized them to a diet. They just gave them a sheet and say, read this and follow it, to intensive lifestyle intervention. Only in America would they have a psychologist that called the patient every week, and they had an exercise program, not necessarily going to the gym, but 45 minutes walking around Central Park each day, for example, and a good diet with a dietitian checking with the patient every week. And the third group was given the tablet metformin. The best outcome in preventing progression was lifestyle modification, and surely the techniques of yoga and relaxation can help here. People say they go to the doctor and they want a tablet. The best doctor is he that does not prescribe, but advises on how change might help, and yoga could play a part here. All drugs have side effects, and the best primary care physician is he who talks to the patient and doesn't give a drug, but the problem is if you're rushed, that takes more time. So to summarize so far, there is an urgent global need for policies that promote prevention, early diagnosis, effective management of type 2. Now, prevention is very important. Primary prevention is prevention of diabetes by identifying high-risk groups and see if we can intervene before diabetes develops. Secondary prevention is equally important. The patient with diabetes, we need to prevent them getting the complications of diabetes that drive cost, drive lower quality of life, and drive morbidity and mortality. So that's secondary prevention. So the message for our governments and for the world at large is we cannot afford to ignore diabetes because the human and economic costs are simply too great. As I've said to you, up to 15% of national health care budgets go on diabetes and more likely its complications. In some countries, that's as high as 40%. And this is often developing countries in the developing world. A large part of this cost and morbidity and mortality is due to the late complications of diabetes. Complications can affect all parts of the body. For example, the microvascular or small blood vessel complications include diabetic eye disease, diabetic retinopathy, diabetic kidney disease. Diabetes is now the commonest cause of patients ending up on dialysis in the world, in the developed world at least. And diabetic neuropathy, and my research is mainly in neuropathy, lower limb problems, but also some in nephropathy. Diabetic neuropathy remains the leading contributory factor in non-traumatic amputations, most of which should be preventable. Let me give you an example of how effective prevention can be. As it says here, diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in working-aged adults in the United Kingdom. From last year onwards, this is no longer true. It's not now the leading cause. Why is that? Because we have a national diabetic eye screening program where every patient doesn't have to go to the hospital. They go to a local optician, have a retinal photograph taken, and this is read centrally, and those with signs of eye disease that need treatment get a referral to the hospital. This simple program has saved eyesight, has reduced the incidence of blindness. Screening for complications is not expensive, especially screening for foot problems and kidney problems, a urine sample, or just looking at the feet with shoes and socks removed. The tragedy of diabetes I will show you. And Voltaire wrote these words: "The art of medicine consists of amusing the patient while nature cures the disease." Now, this may be true for certain areas, but it's not true for diabetes. And this lady I met when I first started as a consultant in diabetes in Manchester some 30 years ago. Whoops, clinical observation here. Let's go back. First of all, you can see she's on peritoneal dialysis. She was on dialysis for chronic kidney disease. She can't focus because she's blind from diabetic retinopathy. This is the patch for her ischemic heart disease. She's got a central scar here, having had, what's the problem with these pointers? Having had a coronary artery bypass graft, and she's got no legs, and she's only 40-something. Most of this is preventable. She wanted me to take her photograph to say, please do something about diabetes so that people don't end up like I have. And work from my group has shown that if you're on dialysis for chronic kidney disease like that nice lady, that this is an independent risk factor for foot problems, and the mortality after amputation is extremely high. These patients do worse than most patients with cancer. They do worse. Their outlook is worse. But this is easily prevented. And here's the study we presented at the American Diabetes Association a few years ago. We followed just under 200 patients in my unit who are on dialysis. We have the largest dialysis program in the UK around Manchester. The 2-year mortality, look at this. If you've had an amputation and you're on dialysis with diabetes, 3 out of 4 are dead within 2 years. This is worse than every form of cancer, except perhaps for lung and pancreas. So diabetes, don't go away thinking diabetes is a mild disease, a touch of sugar. What we need to do is prevent at all stages. Primary prevention, as I said, and this is where you all can play a major part. Early treatment, good treatment to prevent secondary development of complications. So to summarize on that front, the 10-year mortality amongst patients on dialysis is 3 times greater than those who are not with chronic kidney disease, and it's higher than most other problems such as coronary artery disease and cancer. So one might ask, therefore, is diabetes the cancer of the 21st century? There are some similarities. Look at our colleagues in cancer. They've been very successful. Screening, and perhaps because they use fear arousal. People say, oh my God, I'm going to get cancer. I'll go and have my breasts examined. I'll go and have my prostate checked. I'll go and have my bowel checked. So screening and early diagnosis and early intervention can work. But also, we are seeing long-term remission and even cures. I was a houseman 40 years ago in hematology, and it was so sad to see young people dying of leukemia, of Hodgkin's disease, of lymphoma. Many of these now are alive 10, 20 years after effective treatment. Is diabetes similar? If we screen our patients and prevent them developing complications, then they're going to be alive a lot longer. So there are similarities. Primary prevention by screening, early detection, long-term remission can be effective. Increase in public awareness has been very effective in our colleagues in cancer. They're very good. I'm not criticizing them, I think we should learn from them. If you're doing a collection outside a store, as they often do in the UK and in America, and you've got 3 buckets, one that says, please give money for cancer, another one, please give money for heart disease, another one says, please give money for diabetes research, out of 100 rupees, I would guess that 90 rupees would go to cancer, perhaps 8 rupees to coronary artery disease, and if we're lucky, 2 rupees to diabetes. We need to change that. Because people say, oh, diabetes is a touch of sugar. I don't need to worry about that, but I must go and have a mammogram or a prostate check. I must take my statin because heart disease is dangerous. I would put it to you that diabetes is equally dangerous and we need to do more. So fear arousal in terms of really the public is frightened of cancer and heart disease has been effective. And it's also been effective in generating money for research. So I think it behoves us in the diabetes community to be more proactive and to really raise the profile of diabetes as something that's easily treatable in its early stages. We could prevent the complications, but because people don't take it seriously, they walk around for 10 years without knowing they have it, because they haven't had a check. So perhaps we should be screening high-risk groups, those with a family history, those who are very obese, those who've had gestational diabetes, and so on. A few words to close, because there's a session this afternoon